Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden and this is Star Wars, Marvel vs. Dark Horse. So this week, in honor of Star Wars Day, I thought it would be fun to make a video concerning the franchise. I was going to do a complete story of some Marvel miniseries or another, but I thought it might be a fun change of pace to make this video instead. See, Marvel's been running the Star Wars comics for a couple years now, but for a long time before that, Dark Horse was the company that published material related to that franchise. So I wanted to compare the two companies and see which one has done a better job on the whole at depicting Star Wars in their comics. We'll be talking about the merits of both publication lines and their various strengths and weaknesses compared to one another. Now it should be noted that Marvel's Star Wars coverage is ongoing, while Dark Horse has been making these comics for a lot longer than Marvel. Nevertheless, I believe Marvel has been running their comic line for long enough that we can now make a meaningful comparison. Where appropriate, I will try and consider the relative age difference between these two companies and make things as fair as possible between them. Also, please keep in mind that I've enjoyed Star Wars from both Marvel and Dark Horse. I don't really have a preference for who wins or who is better, I just wanted to explore the idea. In that spirit, I created 7 categories to rate how these comics are being published, and we'll see how they line up against each other. So fire up your blasters, assemble your lightsabers, and get ready for a bloodbath. It's time for a battle of bland, obligatory corporate merchandising. Marvel vs. Dark Horse. Round 1. Characters. When we consider the characters of the Star Wars comics, it's important to consider two things: what characters are used and how effectively the comics use them. Dark Horse generally focused on a wider range of characters in their stories when compared to Marvel, not only including content from both the original and prequel trilogy, for better or worse, but also incorporating many cool characters from the expanded universe as well. Jaina and Jacen Solo, Admiral Thrawn, and the Yuzang Vong all come to mind as interesting additions to these stories. While many of these aforementioned characters and additions were created in related novels or articles on magazines, Dark Horse did a great job at adapting many of them and making some pretty memorable contributions to the Star Wars universe. Even stories from the prequel era were handled fairly well, if not much better than the actual prequel movies, especially when it comes to characters like Darth Maul or General Grievous, who were both featured in stories I quite enjoy. Marvel, on the other hand, largely focuses on characters surrounding the events of the original trilogy. The prequel and extended universe characters have been all but forgotten, while the focus has shifted to starting from scratch. Yes, they have taken the time to introduce some new characters into the mix as well. That being said, none of Marvel's characters have quite left the same impact as some of the figures used in Dark Horse. There isn't really any equivalent to somebody like Thrawn or Mara Jade in terms of memorability or significance. And while Marvel does a good job at depicting the original characters and using them well, Dark Horse did a great job at that too. So in the end, I give the point to Dark Horse for having more characters to work with and making some really great stuff with said characters. Both Marvel and Dark Horse really have a good handle on the original trilogy, guys, but Dark Horse did a better job adding to this universe with both the extended universe and prequel characters. Now, this is going to be a category that favors them naturally, as Marvel has had less time to work with new characters on the whole, but don't worry, because other categories will actually favor Marvel for this very same reason. But for now, Dark Horse 1, Marvel 0. Round 2. Stories. Perhaps the single most important category has to be what kind of stories these two companies produce. To the credit of both Dark Horse and Marvel, I can think of plenty of stories from both companies I really liked, and others that didn't leave much of an impression on me, and still others that were just downright annoying. Unfortunately for Dark Horse, pretty much all their annoying comics come from their early years or prequel days. There are some good comics from those eras, to be sure, but a lot of stuff is lackluster or simply not enjoyable. Marvel, on the other hand, has thus far maintained a far more consistent level of quality. They've really made some good stuff right on the level of Dark Horse's best. Marvel's decision to discard pretty much anything outside of the original trilogy also left the comics far more accessible than Dark Horse ever could be. That's very inviting to new readers. In comparison, too many Dark Horse comics I came across were enjoyable, but only if you read like half a dozen comics or a book first, and that can be really tough to manage if you are only a casual reader. Marvel's better for people who aren't up to date on the extended universe on Star Wars, which is perfectly fair, and would represent most Star Wars fans. Just like how Dark Horse got a bit of an advantage in the first round for running a little bit longer, Marvel kind of wins this round for the opposite reasons. Marvel has been doing this for a lot shorter of a period of time. After all, Dark Horse was publishing Star Wars comics from 1991 all the way to 2014, while Marvel has only been running things for a little over a year now. In other words, Marvel has had less of a chance to totally screw things up, and while Dark Horse has, like any company, made some missteps over the years. Even if I were only to look at, say, a year of Dark Horse publications and compare that to Marvel's year, Marvel is still looking better when it comes to Star Wars stories. They've had a lot more consistently better written content, from the excellent miniseries featuring Lando Calrissian, Princess Leia, or Chewbacca, to the core Star Wars series and other ongoing work like Darth Vader's solo comic. Dark Horse has had some really powerful entries too. Tom Taylor's work, some of the Clone Wars stuff, and the Vector storyline all come to mind. But in the end, I do believe Marvel, on average, pulls ahead of Dark Horse when it comes to the quality of the stories they are producing. Point goes to Marvel. Round 3. Tone and Focus. Tone and focus are two elements of a story often overlooked but incredibly important just the same. After all, it was the laid-back tone of the original trilogy that, coupled with excellent character work and a focus on telling a fun adventure, with more serious themes underlying the whole premise, made the original movies a great thing in the first place. Meanwhile, the prequels messed these things up so bad that the movies are hard to even sit through. The overly serious tone the prequels take of themselves did not blend well with its complete lack of focus. One minute the story is way too involved in political intrigue, the next, Jar Jar Binks is stepping in the poopies. So the tone and focus of a story is quite important, and it can be really the deciding factor in whether or not a Star Wars story is any good. That being said, it should be noted there is no default tone for Star Wars, especially in the comics. You can have things that are dark and menacing in the theme of pretty much any scene with Darth Vader or the Emperor in it, or you can have things laid back and fun in the spirit of, say, Han and Luke fighting off a group of TIE fighters with the Falcon in A New Hope. Indeed, both Marvel and Dark Horse have shown a consistent understanding of that. Both companies have published stories of both natures. Usually, Sith-related stories have dark, dramatic tones to their works, and adventures featuring the likes of Han Solo or other similar characters tend to be more lighthearted in nature, and both Marvel and Dark Horse tend to work these things really well. Dark Horse has also offered a wider range of stories in terms of tone, to varying degrees of success. In comparing the two, I actually find both companies are very close in tone, but I do tend to favor Marvel. So far, this company has done a slightly better job at conveying the tone of the original Star Wars movies, and I get the impression that the people working on these comics have a strong understanding for what makes Star Wars so great. It shows in their work, and while Dark Horse has similar examples of such quality, all too often they seem to fall into the trap of making stories too dark, to artificially make a story seem more epic. That can and has worked to a degree, but it also makes the stories feel a little less like Star Wars. Star Wars was really never about brooding darkness or trying to look cool. After all, this was always a movie where mass genocide happens about halfway through, and it's still pretty much a happy-go-lucky fun time overall. Star Wars was about being cool, not acting cool, and so far Marvel has done a better job at understanding that than Dark Horse ever did. I am of course speaking generally, as this isn't true for all Marvel or Dark Horse comics, simply an average I've come to expect. There's also a matter of focus, and again, Marvel comes out on top. Dark Horse's use of the expanded universe was great, but it did leave things a lot more cluttered. Unburdened with decades of additional continuity, Marvel has done a better job at focusing on the characters we are more accustomed to and telling a cleaner story because of it. Too often Dark Horse would be shackled with the clutter of so much backstory or extra characters that the comics didn't feel quite as polished or streamlined as Marvel's has so far. In the end, this round goes to Marvel, putting them in the lead over Dark Horse by a score of 2-1. Round 4. Creativity. Now this category would be pretty self-explanatory, though some people might feel this bleeds into the first 3 rounds. It doesn't, for the record. You can have a really tightly written story with excellent characters and a well-defined tone and structure in your writing, but it can still lack anything new to say or add to the Star Wars canon. Creativity is important for making the story stand out and for contributing something new to the equation. If writers and artists aren't consistently adding material or ideas to the Star Wars franchise, then they aren't really adding anything at all, and stagnation can result. I question the point of comics like these. Given the breadth of the Star Wars universe and the freedom to feature anything given the nature of space itself, creativity should be expected in these comics. Both companies do understand this, and both have shown plenty of creativity in their works. In particular, the artists working under both publishers have used the nature of the Star Wars universe to depict some truly amazing things, while many writers have dreamed up some really cool stuff over the years as well. But looking over the collected works of these two companies, I have to give this round to Dark Horse. The company has been able to add a lot and do some truly imaginative things, while Marvel, thus far, has largely stuck to the ideas, themes, and concepts from the original trilogy. That's okay, but when it comes to creativity, when it comes to bringing something new to the table, Well, Dark Horse really has a lot more of this. Two examples of Dark Horse's ability to launch creative ideas comes to mind. The first is The Star Wars, an adaptation of Lucas's original script for what would one day be called A New Hope, and by far the most interesting Star Wars comic I have ever read. Another is Vector, a story I've already mentioned, but I quite enjoyed because it spanned thousands of years and featured content from multiple eras of the expanded universe. To date, Marvel hasn't published anything Star Wars related with nearly as much ambition as titles like these. So the point robustly goes to Dark Horse, and with that, the two are tied up again at 2 points apiece. So let's see how things go with Round 5. Action. When considering anything Star Wars, it would be silly not to include how well the story conveys its action. Ranging from massive battles to one-on-one combat, a big part of Star Wars has always been about having cool fights between figures of great power and epic, high-stakes dogfighting in the depths of space. Both companies understand this and show it well, and have plenty of cool examples of excellent action between them. I'd almost give this round to Marvel, because on the whole they found their action scenes to be a little better polished, planned out, and executed on the pages. They're particularly good at effectively communicating the beats of an action scene. We see how blows connect or don't, and what effect this is having on the characters in question. Now that being said, there's also a lot of great, well-crafted action that came out of the Dark Horse comics. But speaking broadly, Marvel does come across a little bit more polished than its predecessor. So I would have given the point to Marvel, except for one tiny, but extremely crucial point. Many of Dark Horse's comics either take place after the movies or with characters that don't appear in the films at all, which means that anything can happen to them. They don't feel as bound by the events in the film universe over at Dark Horse. In contrast, Marvel's insistence on mostly focusing on the period between A New Hope and Empire really takes any sense of danger out of the equation. Think about it like this. Anytime Luke, Leia, Han, Chewbacca, Darth Vader, the Emperor, C-3PO, R2-D2, Lando, and a few other characters are in a fight or in a battle, we already know they're going to be fine before the conflict even begins. Because they have to be fine. Because we already know exactly what's going to happen. Worse still, any supposedly important mission that will help or hinder the rebellion is also a moot point, because we all know, no matter what happens, the rebels are destined to win. Therefore, the actions of most characters in these comics have no meaningful consequences in the context of the larger story happening around them. That's a rough spot for when trying to convey a sense of urgency, which you need to do in a fight if you want it to have any sense of tension whatsoever. Now I get the reasons why Marvel chose to do this. They didn't want to step on the toes of The Force Awakens or any of the other new movies, and they wanted to start fresh. Like I said, one real advantage of the Marvel comics is they're a lot more accessible, but accessibility comes with a price. Taking place in between upcoming and existing movies makes a lot of the Marvel comics feel very pointless, or at the very least, leaves me feeling disengaged with the content in question. Why would I care? These characters have to survive no matter what. On the other hand, Dark Horse really relished in their ability to basically do anything they wanted, and the fact that anything can happen with the main characters means I'm more invested in action scenes because I don't know what the fate of the protagonist is going to be. This creative freedom makes a big difference and secures Dark Horse an easy win with this round. The point goes to them, putting Dark Horse ahead of Marvel by 1 point. Round 6. Talent. Talent, unsurprisingly, matters. You can have the greatest idea in the world, but put it in the hands of a creative team not in sync with one another, or give it to a writer simply not ready or capable of handling the material, and a great idea can go sour very quickly. This round rather easily goes to Marvel. Dark Horse had plenty of great people write for them over the years, but Marvel, being Marvel, was able to use their best writers and artists on Star Wars, and the result really shows. Not only does this speak to the consistent level of quality they've been able to maintain, but it also means that a lot of Star Wars comics have been really good. This is how and why they were able to compete so well with Dark Horse when it came to the first 5 rounds. Yes, it is a little unfair. Marvel has way more resources than Dark Horse ever did, allowing them to secure writers Dark Horse never could. But this shouldn't really be a factor when we're evaluating quality. The simple fact of the matter is that Marvel has better talent available to them, so naturally, on some level, they're going to have better written comics. This translates to the characters, story, and tone, but also to how the story is executed. That's why I find the dialogue tends to be better in Marvel comics over the Dark Horse ones. I also believe this is why the art quality of Marvel is, on average, a bit better than that produced by Dark Horse. It also speaks well to Marvel's future with these comics, because they're robustly in the hands of talented, hard-working people. Don't get me wrong, Dark Horse had a lot of great people attached to their work. Marvel just happens to use some of the very best, and in the end, that did make a difference. And with that, we head into the final round with the scores tied up. Amusingly, I didn't plan this out, things just kind of worked out this way. But I guess that's good because it leaves things in suspense for the deciding point. Round 7, editing. Now I'm sure some people are going to roll their eyes or think this is a silly category. To be clear though, I think editing matters just as much as any other category we've discussed so far. A good editor can turn a decent comic great. A bad editor can make a great comic horrible. A good editor can make valuable additions to scripts, important changes to improve the flow or appeal of a story, and can advocate for cutting bad or silly ideas back while bringing good or fun ideas forward. Meanwhile, a bad editor can do practically the opposite of everything I just said. Editors are also a defining factor in the spirit and relationship between the staff working on a comic behind the scenes. You may not see the effects of their work, as their influence is often subtle and very hard to parse from the work of the writers and artists. Editing is behind every major comic, good and bad, and often has a lot to do with the end quality of that content. Now, it's important to note I can only go by the information available to me. I've never worked for either Dark Horse or Marvel, and have only ever had limited contact with people who have. However, when I look at the companies in question, it's enough to convince me that I think Dark Horse had the better editorial staff overall. I get the impression that both companies benefited from good editors on the whole. Neither are perfect, but plenty have great examples of their work done well. But at the end of the day, Marvel's focus on comics from just 1 or 2 time periods feels prohibitive to the writers, while Dark Horse seemed to have been a lot more open about doing different stories of varying quality and content, and from many different eras of the Star Wars universe. That difference has been expressed throughout this video, and realistically is probably why Dark Horse is going to win this little contest. Creative freedom matters, and might matter more than anything else. Dark Horse allowing their creative teams to better explore new ideas, create a sense of real stakes within their story, and produce some excellent comics overall, gives them an edge over Marvel, who hasn't quite done that. Until they loosen up some of their internal restrictions, Dark Horse will always have this advantage over Marvel because of this relative freedom their writers and artists were able to enjoy, and the effect that has on the quality of their content. So there you have it. By a score of 4 to 3, I give the win to Dark Horse. Personally, when I started making this video, I assumed I was going to give the win to Marvel. But after thinking about what makes a good Star Wars comic, and looking at how these two companies approach their works, the Dark Horse win does make a lot of sense to me. Marvel's biggest, most consistent problem throughout all of this is that they're stuck telling stories in 2 time periods, between movies 4 and 5, and between movies 6 and 7. And that's a problem, because we still know the main characters basically have to live through these events so they can show up in the next movie. This boxes otherwise talented writers into having to tell a story within a more restrictive structure, while Dark Horse seem to enjoy much greater flexibility in their material. I'm not going to pretend that Dark Horse writers always had creative control over their works, they very obviously didn't a lot of time. But the relative freedoms they enjoyed did seem to lead to some really cool stuff. It would be great if Marvel could start making content farther outside of the existing lore, so we can better explore these new ideas and concepts, and give writers and artists more opportunity to explore different takes and interpretations of Star Wars content. Honestly, if Marvel did that, they probably would win this little contest. It's also important to remember Marvel's still new at the Star Wars franchise in this sense. Give them some time and the opportunity to actually have some fun with this stuff, and I bet they can really produce something great. But for now, Dark Horse has done a better job at exploring this fictional universe and having more interesting things to say about it. If you're interested, I recommend you check some of their work out. Some of the comics I found interesting were the Boba Fett series, some of the Darth Maul comics, and The Last Command, but there are plenty of other great choices. My absolute favorite from either company, for the record, was The Star Wars, the adaptation of Lucas's original draft I mentioned earlier. It was honestly just really interesting to read as a Star Wars fan. I recommend you check it out for yourself. Meanwhile, I've made a couple of Marvel recommendations throughout this video, but if you're watching this on the week of May the 4th, Marvel is releasing several of their comics under the True Believers print. I'm a big fan of this line, as Marvel has been doing this for some time, providing introductory issues of various comics they've made over the years for a very low price. And this week you can get a lot of their launch issues for the Star Wars comics for only $1 each. That's a great deal and a fantastic way to check out these series for yourself. So thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep reading comics.